It's hard to think of a television show that's more beloved in the internet age than The Office. First airing in the US in March 2005, The Office is a remake of the earlier British show of the same name. I could take you through the overview of the show, the general plot lines, the wide array of characters, and the narrative arc of the series, but if you're watching this on YouTube, there's a pretty good chance that you already know all that stuff. In fact, there's a pretty good chance that if you've seen the show once, you've seen it 5 or 6 times. It's impossible to go online today without seeing references, GIFs, or clips of The Office being shared as reactions to, well, everything. It could be called the most important and widely understood cultural signifier of the millennial and Gen Z era, something everyone can understand and attach to, much like the Bible used to be in generations before us. Well, okay, maybe not that significant. But it's a big deal. It was the most popular show on the most popular streaming platform for years. But at this point, we must ask ourselves, why? Why is a show that satirizes mid-2000s office life so beloved by a generation that has never had a traditional office job? This being an assignment for a college class, the answer, conveniently, lies at the intersection of a lot of our readings from the semester. Namely, using Fredric Jameson's concept of the nostalgia film, Mark Fisher's capitalist realism, and Svetlana Boym's reflective nostalgia, as well as Graeber, Fukuyama, and Marx, of course, I'm going to figure out why The Office is so popular among people who have never worked in an office. The answer lies in one concept: nostalgia for an invented, idealized, and dead American economic past. Part 1: The Life and Death of the American Workplace. The Office is a show about everywhere and nowhere. Dunder Mifflin could be any company, in any industry that's facing decline, aka anything outside of technology. Sure, it's set in Scranton, but it could be set in Akron or Raleigh or Fargo. The show itself exists outside of time and space. It's a remake of a British show, anchored to nothing other than an aesthetic of capitalist familiarity. Fredric Jameson, American philosopher, literary critic, and goatee haver, has a perfect phrase to apply to this discussion: the nostalgia film. For Jameson, a nostalgia film is something that uses cultural signifiers, cliches, and pastiche to gesture to a bygone era without really saying anything about it. Ready Player One is an interesting example. It borrows images from the past, but refuses to actually use them for anything other than allowing the viewer to say, "Oh, I remember that." Moving back to Scranton, it's not outside the realm of possibility to say that to millennials and Gen Z, The Office is a nostalgia film. Most of our generation will never have a job like the ones at Dunder Mifflin because jobs like that aren't going to be around for much longer. It's even addressed in the show with the running in-joke that the industry is in decline.
Yeah. Oh God, I practically invented decline.
But here's the interesting part. The nostalgia only works if this isn't your day-to-day. The intended audience of the show was people working dead-end office jobs with goofy coworkers and a dumb boss. It failed with them because nostalgia to this morning isn't fun. But to younger generations, who are more worried about the job market, who are likely to be working multiple jobs, and whose parents probably earned more than they ever will, The Office is an exercise in nostalgia for a bygone American dream. We like to think that happiness was easier for past generations, and The Office reinforces this perception. The baby boomer white picket fence is an invented memory of an American dream, and our generation has a nostalgia for when that was, quote-unquote, enough. Nostalgia, but for another past's future. The last few seasons make this painfully, boringly clear. Jim starts his own business and it becomes successful. Michael starts his family and it becomes successful. Dwight gets his promotion and it becomes successful. That's the American dream, in case you didn't pick up on that. Andy even says it.
I wish there was a way to know you're in the good old days before you've actually left them.
When viewed as a nostalgia film for a bygone American dream, the appeal of The Office starts to make a little more sense. Part 2, I've seen The Office more times than you. Maybe this is an entirely personal affliction, but I can't think of any young person I know who has seen The Office once and once only. Sure, streaming services make it easier and easier to rewatch our favorite shows, but why has this one show become renowned for being endlessly rewatchable? There's a theoretical answer, but there's also a simple question of scope. The characters in The Office are caricatures, which means one image is all you need to conjure up an emotion, making them perfect as reaction pictures for social media. The Office never gets far from your mind because when you go on Twitter, you see Kevin spilling the chili or Michael screaming, "No!" So when you open Netflix, your mind is immediately drawn to the familiar. As for the theoretical side of the rewatching question, we can look to Svetlana Boym, cultural theorist, professor, and not goatee haver. Boym points to a bifurcation in the way we think about the past: reflective nostalgia and restorative nostalgia. In an abject oversimplification, reflective nostalgia looks to the past and says, wow, wasn't that beautiful? I'm so glad I saw that. Restorative nostalgia looks to the past and says, wow, wasn't that beautiful? I'm so unhappy that I can't see that again. I'm gonna go try and change the whole world so it looks like it used to, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, we can complicate our model of The Office as a nostalgia for an imagined American dream by adding in an element of reflective nostalgia. The Office's themes of industrial decline and personal unfulfillment don't make us want to return, at least in so many words, but give us the opportunity to rest in a familiar, comforting, home-like memory. This is why The Office is primed for repeated viewings. Boyum also points to the origins of the phrase nostalgia as a medical affliction among Swiss soldiers fighting away from home who were uncomfortable in new, rapidly changing surroundings and so retreated into memory. In the digital age, and especially in the coronavirus pandemic, we spend our entire lives on a rapidly changing, combative, and unfamiliar landscape: social media. Endless choices and unfamiliarity gives us longing for something we've seen before, something that's familiar. When you're overwhelmed hearing about the 10th national tragedy this week, you retreat back to the safety and comfort of your memory. The Office can be that place. It might sound sort of pathetic to say that The Office becomes a home to which nostalgia can be anchored, and yeah, it sort of is. But in a digital landscape that can be as combative and unfamiliar as a war zone, where else do you have to hold on to? Part 3, fact, farce, and those effers on Wall Street. Most of my discussion at this point has centered around the general themes of The Office and the way that cultural intersections position it as an inflection point of nostalgia. But the show itself is unique too for a strange and self-aware play with nostalgia that enables both of the previous 2 points. The show is shot in a mockumentary style, and at points, characters are given the opportunity to watch back tapes of their own lives. The finale centers around such nostalgic self-congratulation, living out some bizarre fantasy of having always been the main character of everybody else's life. The show responds to real-world moments through cute simplification and pacification. Marx has a great quote: "All historical moments happen twice, once in tragedy and once in farce." As an example of this, the financial crisis of 2008 was farcified in The Office, reduced to shareholders are angry and management is corrupt, but some of them are still nice guys. But don't worry, Dunder Mifflin will somehow survive. Layoffs are constantly threatened, held over the plot's head, but never executed on characters that we actually care about. There's a narrative shield around The Office that protects it from the fluctuations of the real world because we know that nothing really bad will ever happen to our favorite characters. Mark Fisher has a concept called capitalist realism. Building off of Fukuyama's proclamation that the end of US-USSR struggles was the end of history, Fisher posits that we're living in a world that cannot imagine anything outside of capitalism. The Office is both the absolute exemplar of this condition as well as the peaceful sanctuary of escape from it. There is no The Office without an office. The characters' family, friends, social life, everything revolves around an institution of capital. Yet they're protected by a narrative shield that means the downsides of capitalist realism, layoffs, recession, debt, will never be anything more than a season arc. If we're trying to understand why the generation that has grown up in a world without an alternative to capitalism finds peace in The Office, it's because The Office is the closest thing to an escape from capitalist realism that can still happen under its reaches. And that narrative shield feels really, really, really nice. Conclusion: this guy is a freak. At this point, I've been ranting about The Office for almost double the amount of time this project is supposed to be. I started with the question of why people who aren't the target audience love The Office so much and suggested it has to do with our generation's nostalgia for a bygone American dream. I talked about how The Office primes itself for rewatching, furthering this nostalgic spiral. And I ended with positioning the show within a capitalist realist framework. So in conclusion, I'll just leave it at this. The Office is a really good show. There's a lot of really funny jokes, a lot of great actors, and the writing is top-notch. Although I didn't talk about these points, they also have an enormous impact on the reason our generation loves it. But at the end of the day, the next time you turn on The Office and laugh at Dwight's hijinks or Michael's buffoonery, try to think about why Dunder Mifflin seems so relatable. You might be surprised by some of the details you pick up.